You guys hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. Well, to start, I wanted to give you a little biography or short biography background on our two panelists. We have Mary Manzari, and we also have Alex LaSalle. So Mary attended the VCU dance program and has been studying dance for over 20 years. A native of Washington, D.C., Mary currently resides in Richmond, Virginia, where she is in her 6th year as the TAP program director at 804 Dance Place. As a TAP educator, she continues to explore the accuracy in the origin and history of TAP dance through footage sessions, research, and detailed conversations with artists that have shaped the art form into what it is today. So a little bit about Alex. Alex LaSalle is a gifted percussionist, spiritual healer, educator, and soulful Afro-Puerto Rican and Afro-Cuban singer. He holds over 25 years of experience singing and drumming Afro-Caribbean folkloric music. Alex is the founder and musical director of New York City's powerhouse bomba ensemble, Alma Moyo, who will be performing for us later today, by the way. He is also a teaching artist for Caribbean Cultural Center and a variety of cultural arts education organizations throughout New York City. In addition to this, Alex is also recognized by elders of the Mayombe spiritual system as being amongst the top interpreters and leaders of the Congo-Cuban Mambos de Palo Mayombe with over 28 years of experience. So to start off, I would like to ask you to tell me a little bit about yourselves and your family's roots. Who wants to go first?
So my name is Mary Manzari. Again, thank you guys for being here with me. So I am both African American, Italian, and German. I will say that I was raised by my Italian and German mother, and then in the later years, I started to explore a little more of tap dance and my African roots. So yeah, that's my short answer there.
Hello.
Thank you.
All right. Hello. I'm Alex LaSalle. I'm from Puerto Rico, and my mother is a black Puerto Rican woman. My father was a white Puerto Rican man, and so I was exposed to both cultures growing up, but primarily to my mother's side of the family. And so through that, I just developed an interest in learning more about my mother's roots and who she was and my family's roots. And from when I was about 14, 15 years old, just decided to really delve deep into the study of African traditions in Puerto Rico and then eventually throughout the Americas. So.
Thank you. Okay, so I would like you to tell me a little bit about each of your genres. What makes it unique, and what do you love about it? And that's a big question.
Well, for tap dance, one of the things that I love about it is that it is a form of communication and that you can speak to either audience members that are observing or other tap dancers and dancers of other genres without saying anything at all verbally. So that's something that I really like. There's a couple of common phrases that I'll actually be demonstrating for you guys today, where I can go to any country in the world and I can start doing one of these phrases and they will know exactly what I'm referring to. And from that point, we can just continue to improv, speak to each other, and explore just off of energy, which is something that I appreciate in my own. So yes, that's my favorite part.
Yes. Bomba, I didn't start as a bombero. I started actually singing Afro-Cuban music because I was raised around a lot of Cubans in New York. My godfather was with him since I was a young child, and he just exposed me to the songs from the Congo traditions of Cuba. And as a child, that's where I started. When I heard bomba for the first time, it was actually not at a bomba cultural event at a Puerto Rican, but at a drumming of palo, of the Cuban mayombe, because the person who was holding it that the ceremonial drumming was a member of the Cepeda family. And so afterwards, they brought out these big drums, which weren't the congas, and I asked my godfather, I said, what's this? He said, you should know, that's your people. This is not Cuban stuff, this is Puerto Rican stuff. So I started asking Tito Cepeda and Roberto Cepeda, and they started explaining to me that this is bomba, and it was just this has been a lifelong love affair, and I love bomba to death. I love everything about it. You really can't put it into words. It moves you, and it changes you, and it grabs you, and throws you up in the air, and you never know when you're going to come down. It's a whole experience.
And I heard you say the magic that happens in tap dance around the world. And being with the background of bomba, I totally can relate to that magic, and I know that's kind of what you were talking about there. So that's awesome. So how does this genre interact with other musical genres and cultures?
Do you want to go first?
I mean, first thing, we have to be clear that bomba wasn't even considered Puerto Rican music up until the 1950s. In Puerto Rico, they said it was black music, and because it was black music, it wasn't Puerto Rican music. It wasn't included amongst the genre. And it wasn't until late 1970s, early 1980s that they even allowed people who weren't African or black looking to even participate. So like my grandfather was a bombero, but someone like me would have not been able to participate in the dances, even though my grandfather, my mother, and everyone on my mother's side is black. It was, this was strictly music for black people. And it was music that was done to include black people throughout the Caribbean. I'll make it brief, but there's a great article and it wasn't an article, it was basically, they tried to really take apart this individual named Eustacio Flores in the 1930s because he was invited to do an exposition of Puerto Rican music. And when he showed up with his bomba group. And it was for like a Club de los Leones in Puerto Rico. And it was all over the newspaper in 1937, August, literally the whole month. It made front page where they basically just talked trash about him, his family. But what they did also show was that every member of his group was from a different part of the Caribbean. There was only 2 or 3 actual Puerto Ricans in the group. So these were black folks from around the Caribbean. They were doing what we want to call Puerto Rican music, but this is really African music in Puerto Rico, right? So it included folks from Martinique, Guadeloupe, Haiti, Cuba. The group had folks from Dominica, from the Dominican Republic. So it was very, ¿qué es la palabra? Like, como que reunía a todo el mundo. It really just united folks from around, the Caribbean. And so this music has always been something that just kind of like shoots off. We know for a fact that the roots of jazz and blues, right, are found, here in the United States, but the rhythms that give birth to jazz and blues are the same rhythms that to this day we still play in Puerto Rico, like bambula and juba and calinda, So these are rhythms that we continue to play in Puerto Rico, and we know for a fact, documented, that these are rhythms that gave birth to jazz and blues here in the Americas.
So that was actually a perfect segue into what I was going to say. I was going to touch on jazz. So tap, as we know, is dance, but also considered music in and of itself. A form of percussion, much like body percussion, stepping, things like that. And as we know, in the early 1920s, we started to see jazz on the rise, and we started to see tap dancers pair their rhythms with jazz rhythms, obviously originated through the rhythms that you will be playing today. The Hoofers Club in Harlem was a very, very important place for community between jazz musicians and tap dancers. They would explore together. That's really what started to expand tap dancing, I guess if you were to refer to it as a bag. So we appreciate the polyrhythms and the multimeters and things like that. And people started to play at the Hoofers Club in Harlem from that point. Everything that they were practicing, challenging, stealing steps, things like that, stealing rhythms, musicians stealing them from tap dancers from musicians, literally called stealing steps and stealing rhythms. Those things then progressed into what we know as performances in famous places like the Cotton Club and on Broadway. We started to see tap dance. Originally, the rhythms for tap dance form with jazz music in Shuffle Along, which did not actually have jazz shoes. They did more of what we call a soft shoe style. But all of that transitions into jazz music. And now we take those same principles that we paired with jazz music and we apply them to new things. So I'm sure we've all seen tap videos to rap music and to contemporary music and things like that. And so it's now expanding into multiple different musical genres, but mostly paired with blues and jazz, that 12-bar blues, that 4-bar jazz. So yes, very similar.
Thank you. So next question is, how does this genre intersect with the times of slavery?
I guess I can start. So one of the things that made me want to explore the history of tap dance more, and I am still exploring and still learning, is when I was a young child, I had a couple of dance teachers mention that tap dance was derived from Irish people and Irish dance. And once I became older, I started to realize that that's just not true. The earlier forms of tap dance, which we were actually discussing earlier, comes from a dance called juba, which is a lot of body percussion, so clapping and touching our shoulders, touching our arms, stomping our feet, creating specific rhythms to ward off these bad spirits. Originally, the Congo slaves brought that down to Charleston, South Carolina. We started to see that a little bit more. And then from that point, it just essentially grew. We actually have the first tap dancer that is, I should say, the first recorded tap dancer. Is named or referred to as Master Juba. Actual name is William Henry Lane Jr. And he was actually named Master Juba because the steps that he did with wooden tap shoes were reminiscent of the Juba dance. And then from that point, it just continued to progress from there. We essentially use it as a form of communication when Black people were not able to speak to each other, or they were worried that during, social gatherings and things like that, that they would start to come up with a plan, so on and so forth. So we use that to speak to each other without actually saying anything. And then from that point, it has transitioned. Yes, it has meshed with other styles of dance, as we can see later down the line, Lindy Hop, so on and so forth. But when it comes to tap dance, it really comes from a place of oppression. And I think that we really need to understand where that comes from so that we know how to progress and how to continue to grow it into today.
Powerful. Yes. Yep. I mean, bomba in Puerto Rico is actually the oldest musical tradition of the island. It's older than música jíbara, it's older than plena, and we know that some of the oldest recorded, documented bomba dances happened towards, the mid 1600s in Puerto Rico. We also know that bomba was, it was brought to Puerto Rico by enslaved Africans, primarily also from the Congo. In fact, you can divide bomba into two sections: those that were before the Haitian Revolution and the rhythms that came after the Haitian Revolution. We start seeing the influx of folks that, so Haitian Revolution breaks out, it starts, folks didn't just leave Haiti, the slave masters didn't just leave, they actually left with enslaved Africans to different parts of the Americas. In fact, that's how my mother's family arrives to Puerto Rico. 147 enslaved Africans from the area of Limbe in Haiti go to Puerto Rico. Hence my last name, LaSalle. And so this same thing happened throughout the Americas. We know that bomba was played as far north, documented as far north as New York, upstate New York in the Poughkeepsie area, by a man that was documented. His name was Jackie Quackenboss, and he was also called the King of the Congo. And he was playing a barrel drum, just like the ones that are back there. The beautiful thing is they gave exact measurements of the drum in the interview that was done. They're pretty much a bomba drum, goat skin. Someone else was playing two sticks on the side, and he referred to the music as bomba, and then he was singing bambulas. And that was 1600s New York, upstate New York. We know that, again, Congo Square in New Orleans, multiple bomba rhythms that we play in Puerto Rico gives birth to jazz and blues there. Mississippi, there's different parts throughout the United States and the rest of the Americas, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Martinique, Guadeloupe. I mean, pretty much all the islands share what they call the big drum tradition, the guoca, which is just a big drum tradition. And this is just one of the traditions of that big drum tradition. So you found it throughout the Americas, and you know, there's just sister and brother musics from that we find in Puerto Rico to this day.
Thank you, Alex. And just to reiterate, I think you mentioned that jazz was used to communicate. I think, you know, bomba has that history as well, which I thought was amazing.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the bomba dances were used to plan uprisings. You know, it was used to plan uprisings throughout the island. And the way they did it was not through the music or through the songs the way it was done here in the States, but in fact it was done through the dance. It was in the dance where what the part of the dance known as the piquete were actually messages that were being sent, and which is why the drum was able to follow the dancer, because that way the message could be heard in another plantation, in another part. And so it was used to plan uprisings. Another interesting fact is that if it wasn't for bomba, there wouldn't be any Morse code, because Samuel Morse came up with bomba. His sister was married to a man from the Lean Plantation, and I think it was either Arroyo or Guayama. But anyway, Samuel, the first line was put up from one plantation to the next, you know, and he was listening to the bomba dances, and he started coming up with the patterns. And he actually wrote this down in his own memoirs. He came up with the Morse code, listening to the bomba dances in Puerto Rico. So.
And I do just want to clarify that yes, tap dance was also used as a form of communication and to you know, plan these uprisings, so on and so forth. And even though I did touch on jazz music, you know, William Henry Lane was born in the early 1800s, so this dates way, way back. And tap dance originated without any music at all. And then from that point, it started to change a little bit and mesh with different genres of music and build from there. So similar roots there.
Awesome. I got goosebumps. You guys were saying this, and that's awesome. His next question. So, and maybe you have touched this a little bit when you were talking about. Are any other American genres rooted in this, in your genre? And what about in any other regions or cultures?
Name of music. I'm serious. When we talk about American music, we're talking about African music reinvented in the Americas. Everything from rock to hip hop to jazz to blues to R&B to pop to anything, even country. You know, the banjo is an African instrument. You know, so you find African influences in every musical genre, not only here in the United States, but throughout the Americas. You know, what are the national musics of the Americas? Like, to name a few, you have samba, you know, which comes from the Congolese art form known as semba. You have cumbia, another Congo art form. I mean, if it wasn't for the Congo, you probably wouldn't have the music the way we know it today in the Americas. They're responsible for the majority of the musical genres in the Americas. Like, you know, forget about it. So we can go on. That's why I say name one, because really they're all connected. You know?
Yeah, and I 100% agree. If we're tap dancing, and whether you're teaching students or talking to another tap dancer through dance, you know, what do we always say we want to find? The one. And what do we refer to as the one as the downbeat? And, you know, even when whether it comes to jazz music, blues, swing, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. You're really going to want to find that in one, which comes from exactly what he was speaking of. So literally every musical genre, even, you know, hip hop, trap music, like literally anything, you can always find that underlying drum rhythm. And we're just essentially building and just remixing everything. One thing you want to think about is there's been so many years of this already being done that nothing that you can come up with is new. It's just a different way of doing it, and a different variation. I think that's something to really consider, is that these roots that we have, we're just doing the same thing in different orders, right? Starting in different places, creating different rhythms, but from the overall same baseline and foundation. So, yeah.
Thank you. How do you think art genres impact cultures and cohesion among seemingly diverse cultures? And how has your genre evolved locally?
So I think this kind of touches on something that I briefly mentioned earlier. So if we have any tap dancers out in the audience, you are probably familiar with the Shim Sham or the BS chorus. And those are two very common phrases that originated, yes, in America here, but where I can go to Brazil and I can go literally anywhere in the entire world and I can start that 4, a 1, 2, a 3, and that next person is gonna come in on that 1, yeah? Because they're gonna know what I'm speaking of. And I think that's what is so important about tap dance, is that it is a way to bring us together, even when we don't think that we have any commonalities at all. Sometimes I know, I've visited other places, and sometimes language barriers can be a little more difficult, and you want to connect with that person, and this is a way for you to do that without needing to know everything about their everyday life, if that makes sense. So that's something that I really enjoy. I also enjoy that a lot of the way that we share tap dance is community-based. So we would do jam circles where we all circle up and one person has a solo and everyone is keeping time, and then maybe the next person starts with what they ended with, and it's just a continual conversation. You can trade back and forth by me doing one thing and the other tap dancer doing another, or a live musician such as a drummer where we are both percussionists, or you can have sax players and trumpets and all types of things where you are still able to connect with that person. And that's the biggest thing that I like about tap dance, especially because tap dance is two things. It is dance and it is music. We create our own music, so that's something that I love to say to students that I teach, is if the music goes off, who cares? Because we are the music, right? So that's something that I enjoy about my genre.
I mean, when we talk about the birth of music like hip hop, it was born in the South Bronx. It was a collaboration between African Americans and Puerto Ricans in the South Bronx. One of the genres that was part of that collaboration that was brought into it in the late 70s was bomba, as well as samba from Brazil, that gave and mixed with a lot, like with contemporary American music of the time, and it gives birth to hip hop in the South Bronx, and especially the style of dancing known as breakdancing. And tap is actually one of the most influential parts in that as well, because it's bomberos and people who played samba and folks who listened to all types of music that also had a very strong foundation of tap that came up with the style of breakdancing in the South Bronx. So that's just one of tons of examples, so yeah.
And a lot of these art forms were really, they really continue to thrive and progress through community, like street performers. Like breakdancers would literally put down a cardboard box and flip all on their back. So we have to think about these things where it's not something where not everyone got the opportunity to learn in a studio. A lot of white dancers were able to learn tap dance in a studio with a live musician, and a lot of black dancers were not able to do that. And that's something that we have to remember, is that it was all about community. You're walking down the street, you see a dancer, you show them love, things like that. So yes.
Yeah, we have one of the members of Alma Moyo, who's an amazing break dancer as well, and just overall dancer, Nelson Cabas over there, so he could definitely talk to you later about some of those intertwining influences too. So.
Thank you. So what do you feel is important about keeping your genre alive?
I think the main thing is sharing. A lot of dance styles and genres have, not that tap dance does it, it has books and it has videos, but a lot of what we learn and a lot of what we share is passed down through dance and through word of mouth. When you go to dance programs, especially in collegiate learning, collegiate education, you're not going to be able to sit down and open 30 books about tap dance, right? You're going to get into the studio with a 70-year-old tap dancer, and they are going to teach you. And then from that point, you are going to share it with other people, and then you are going to pass it down. And I think that's one of the main important things, is that we share as a community, and I think sometimes when it comes to arts, we try to hold our ideas almost hostage, and really the only way that we're going to be able to continue to share this throughout time is for us to share it with other people, and for us to expand the rhythms that we're doing, expand these steps that we're doing, the mobility that we have. And so that's the biggest thing, is just sharing and making sure that we are a community. It's community-based. It's a community-based dance. It's community-based music. And for us to understand that it's not just dance, that it is music. So I can get in the room with another musician or even another dancer, and we not do the same styles, but we coincide with each other as one. So.
You know, the oldest style of bomba is also the oldest of the musical traditions of the America, which is the bambula rhythm, right? And when I mean America, I'm not talking about the United States. The United States is inside of America. I'm talking about North, Central, South America, the Caribbean. Those are the Americas, all right? So, and at the end of the day, we're all American, right? Whether you're from Mexico, whether you're from Brazil, whether you're from the Caribbean, whether you're from here in the United States, or so one country cannot claim that title. But the oldest of the musical traditions is a rhythm called bambula. The word bambula means to re-remember. It's a Congo word that means to re-remember. But what is the rhythm asking you to remember or re-remember, right? It's asking you to remember who you are. What are your roots? You know, who are you? And it's a way of tapping into the collective unconsciousness and the collective memory of a community, right? So bambula is also something that you may have never done, may have never seen, may have never experienced, but something within you tells you this is it. You know, I've done this before somehow, you know, I felt this. And it's because according to Congo cosmology, you tap into that collective memory of a community. So I'm going to give you, try to make it a very brief example. You know, when I was growing up in New York, in the city, you know, young, high school, you know, doing things that I shouldn't have been doing. And I cut school one day with a whole group of friends. We went out to do things that we weren't supposed to be doing. The police came around and we all split in like 30 different directions. And I knew if I went home and I wasn't at school, my mother was gonna, you know, she was gonna whoop me good. So instead of going home, I couldn't go back to school. I just ran into the train station. I just went from train stop to train stop to train stop, and I just hoping not to get caught by the truancy cops, right? And so I finally get out as my head started to like level out and I can think clearly. And I found myself in front of a library on 53rd Street in Lexington. And I just said, all right, that's the perfect place to hide. So I ran into the library, it was 2 floors, ran up to the 2nd floor, ran to the very corner of the 2nd floor, and I found myself in the section of African, you know, there was a section based on slavery in the Americas, right? And so I said, all right, I'm gonna hang out here. There's nobody here. And it was the section, it was literally like a wall, maybe like 20 feet long, full of books, and it was different parts of the Americas. So it was slavery based in Brazil, Dominican Republic, Cuba, and there was a small section on Puerto Rico. And I pull out a book called El Machete de Ogun, because it just caught my attention. The very first page I opened to in the middle, there was a picture of there's a picture of 2 ladies who were enslaved in Puerto Rico, and they were giving their testimony. And before I even saw the name, and before I even read their testimony, I said, oh my God, this woman looks like my aunt, my mother's aunt, which I called her my aunt, she was my great aunt. I was like, this woman looks like my great aunt. I mean, identical to her. And the lady right next to her looks like my aunt, like my mother's sister. I said, this is crazy. But then when I read the name, it says Testimonio de Leoncia LaSalle, same last name. I said, okay, this is getting interesting. I started reading the testimony. She was enslaved in the, in the part of Puerto Rico where my family's from. And it goes into full detail. In fact, she's the only known first-hand account of enslaved person giving their first-hand account in Puerto Rico. I take the book home, I run to, it was a reference book, so I had to borrow it. So I borrowed it, I ran home. I forgot that I shouldn't have been home. The first thing my mother says, what are you doing here, I said, no, I'm, half a day doing a school project. Here, look at this. She takes it away from me, because it was very taboo in my family to even talk about slavery. They did not want to talk about stuff like that. My mother went through hell in Puerto Rico. She used to get rocks thrown at her as she walked through the barrio to go to school. And they say, uy, mira la negra. They would say, look at the black woman. They would throw rocks at her, the kids from the other neighborhoods that were white neighborhoods. And so she didn't like to talk about that. In her mind, she was Puerto Rican and that's it. There was no color to it. She took the book away and I didn't see the book again until that summer when we went to Puerto Rico. My great aunt calls me. I go over to her house. It was a little wooden shack with a zinc roof. And she says, where did you get this? I said, oh, it was a school project. I haven't seen that in months. She's like, you need to sit down. I need to talk to you. This lady here is my grandmother, and this lady here is my great-grandmother. And they were both enslaved here on this same land And this lady right here, my great-grandmother, was the one who killed the slave master and divided the land up amongst all our family, and which is why we've been living here now for almost 200 years. And so she broke that down. And years later, when I spoke to Dr. Fukiao from the Congo, he said, that's a process known as bambula. And so, it's amazing. It's like you can tap into this. This is part of you.
Thank you. So the final question.
That was brief.
So our final question, and this is a little bit open, so it says, any final thoughts that you would like to share with the community here in regards to the genre or anything?
The main thing that I want to say is that it is okay to explore a genre or a style of music that you are not familiar with. So today we are speaking of bomba and tap dance, and it is okay for you to not be a tap dancer and to want to explore the rhythms of tap dance, to want to explore the rhythms of bomba, because that goes to your previous question, that there is no way that we're going to continue to progress and to share this from generation to generation to generation if we almost hold this hostage. And one of the things that I want to say, especially as a partial African American person, is yes, Black people essentially created tap dance, and it comes from a place of oppression, and we need to recognize that and understand the origin story of tap dance. But that doesn't mean that only Black people can do tap dance. It means that we need to accurately understand where it comes from and the foundation of it so that we can continue to build and explore, and we have to show appreciation for it, because think about it, if no one taught me this, I would not know it. And we're gonna have generations and generations after us where if we don't educate them and we don't show them what we're talking about and what we live, then it's gonna die, and we don't want that. And so that's the biggest thing that I want us to take away from this. Explore things that you are not familiar with, ask questions, delve deep, yeah?
I'm just gonna add on to that, and before I say anything, I had to literally take a breath and say, just kind of like, watch your words, but say what you got to say, right? It's because I tend to kind of get crazy sometimes. But we have to understand that those of us who enter this music, I'm of African descent, but I'm not a Black man, and I recognize that. So I come into this music with privilege, and so that has to be observed too. When you enter this music, you must enter with respect. Whether it's bomba, whether it's any type of music that's not of your root music, of your community or whatever, any type of music, you have to enter with respect. You have to enter knowing your place from the get. You have to know how far you can go and how much you can love it, embrace it, learn it, but enter with respect, right? That's one of the main things. Bomba is just like that, like I said, I've learned with many elders. I was privileged to learn with elders throughout the island. There were, when I learned with them in the late 90s, early 2000s, they were in their late 90s, and they had learned from people who were enslaved in Puerto Rico. A great example is Don Manuel Rivera Pizarro, known as Yeñe, from Cataño. He said that he learned from enslaved people that were enslaved at one point on the island of Puerto Rico. And so we have to recognize this. We have to respect this. We have to know that this wasn't just something that was, given. Like, I'm a musician through and through. I love, I was raised in New York. I came from Puerto Rico as a young kid, and I grew up playing punk. I still play punk. I play rock. I love it. I love blues. I love, but this is something else for me. This is spiritual. This is something that just touches my soul and that touches the soul of the community that I'm part of. So yeah.
Thank you. Not to take away from anything, but I know you said that your last thought was, sharing as a community, and I know you mentioned Bambula, and I just want to mention, I came to Fredericksburg 10 years ago, and Icha brought this bomba as a workshop, and I remember the first time I went to her house and I heard the drums, and it was like something. It was like you said, like this memory and this addiction, instant addiction. So I just wanted to,
Yeah.
have that. Thank you guys for sitting with me and having this chat.